The night. Susan Blake showed up at my door. Rain was pouring so hard, I could barely see her face through the glass. "Lisa, I need Michael. Now." Her hands were shaking. Michael was upstairs, and I assumed his sister had gotten herself into another financial mess. I told her that if she needed money, Michael and I would have to discuss it together. Susan stared at me like I'd said something ridiculous. "There's over $300,000 in that account," she snapped. "Don't tell me he suddenly can't touch it." My stomach dropped. "What account?" Susan went pale. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Michael stood halfway down the stairs staring at his sister, not confused, but terrified. That was when I knew the account was real. And I was the only one who wasn't supposed to know. "Before I tell you what I discovered next, tell me something. If you had been standing in my place, would you have confronted your husband immediately or stayed quiet until you knew the whole truth?" I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments, and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. If stories like mine speak to you, please like and subscribe. What happened after that night changed everything I believed about my marriage. For the first few seconds after Michael appeared on the stairs, none of us moved. Susan stood near the front door, with rainwater dripping from the hem of her coat onto my hardwood floor. Michael's hand tightened around the banister. I remember looking from one face to the other and feeling something inside me shift. Not break. Not yet. Just shift. The way a picture frame moves slightly crooked on a wall. And once you notice it, you can't stop seeing that something is wrong. Michael came down the remaining steps slowly. "Susan," he said, his voice low. "Go home." She looked at him with panic in her eyes. "But the payment," I said. "Go home." I had heard Michael use that tone before, with employees, salesmen, even with our daughter Emily, when she was a teenager and came home too late. It was firm, controlled, almost gentle. But that night, there was something underneath it. Fear. Susan looked at me once before opening the door. "Lisa, I'm sorry. I thought you knew." Michael's face hardened. "Susan." She left without another word. I watched her hurry through the rain toward her car. Her headlights disappeared at the end of our street, leaving Michael and me alone in the quiet house. I turned toward him. "What account?" He sighed. Not the sigh of a man about to confess something terrible. The sigh of a man irritated by an inconvenience. "Lisa, Susan is upset." That doesn't answer my question. "She's having problems with her business again. You know how she gets." I heard what she said. She was emotional. She said there was more than $300,000 in an account. Michael walked past me toward the kitchen. "People say ridiculous things when they're panicking." I followed him. "Is there an account?" He opened the refrigerator, took out a bottle of water, and drank slowly. "After nearly 39 years of marriage, you learn a person's habits." Michael rubbed the back of his neck when he was tired. He tapped his fingers against tables when he was impatient, and when he wanted time to construct an answer, he drank water. That realization disturbed me almost as much as Susan's words. I stood there waiting. Finally, he looked at me. "You're making this into something it isn't." I didn't answer. Maybe I should have demanded the truth right then. But after 39 years with someone, confrontation is not as simple as people imagine. Michael had not always been the man standing across from me that night. Or perhaps he had, and I simply had never been given a reason to look closely enough. I met Michael Martin when I was 25. It was 1987 at a church picnic outside Greenville, South Carolina. I had just started working at an elementary school library. Michael was 28 and working in sales for a regional building supply company. He wasn't the loudest man in the room. That was one of the things I liked about him. He listened. When other men were trying to impress people, Michael asked questions. On our second date, he remembered that I preferred lemon in my iced tea instead of sugar. On our fifth date, he arrived at my apartment with a used bookshelf. Because I had complained that my paperbacks were stacked on the floor, he sanded it himself. I thought I had found a man who noticed the small things. We married 2 years later. We were never wealthy, but we were comfortable. Michael worked hard and slowly moved up through his company. I stayed in education because I loved children and books more than I loved money. When Emily was born, we lived carefully. We clipped coupons. We bought furniture during holiday sales. We took vacations to places we could reach by car. I never minded. There was happiness in those years. Real happiness. Saturday morning pancakes. Emily falling asleep between us during thunderstorms. Michael planting tomatoes every spring, even though squirrels ate half of them. Christmas mornings when wrapping paper covered the living room. That was why what happened later hurt so much. A betrayal doesn't erase the good memories. It poisons your certainty about them. For most of our marriage, we had a simple division when it came to money. I managed the household, mortgage, electricity, groceries, insurance bills, school expenses when Emily was young. Michael handled what he called the bigger numbers, retirement accounts, investments, company benefits, long-term savings. You handle the home, he used to say. I'll handle the numbers. At the time, it sounded practical. Michael understood investments better than I did, and I trusted him. That word, trusted, would become painful later. Whenever I asked about our retirement, Michael usually gave the same answer. We're doing fine, but we need to stay disciplined. So I stayed disciplined. When our kitchen cabinets started peeling, I suggested remodeling. Michael said we should wait. Retirement first. When my car passed 150,000 miles, I wanted to replace it. Michael said another 2 years wouldn't hurt. Cars eat retirement money. When my friend Carol and her husband invited us on an Alaskan cruise, something I had dreamed about for years, Michael smiled and said, maybe after retirement. We're not there yet, Lisa. I believed him, so I kept saying later. Later for the kitchen. Later for the car. Later for the cruise. Later became a habit. Susan was different. Michael's younger sister had always lived as if later might never come. She bought expensive handbags during bad business years. She traded cars more often than I thought necessary. She opened a home decor boutique, closed it, reopened under another name, then expanded again. There was always some crisis. A supplier who needed payment, a lease increase, a slow season, a contractor who supposedly cheated her, and somehow Michael was always involved. She's my sister, he would say. I never objected to helping family, but I did ask questions. How much does she need? A couple thousand. Is she paying it back when she can? Michael, we can't keep rescuing her. Then he would kiss my forehead and tell me not to worry. I have it handled. Those words came back to me that rainy night. I have it handled. There had been moments over the years that suddenly looked different. Once, about 6 years earlier, I found a bank envelope in Michael's truck that I didn't recognize. When I asked him about it, he said it was paperwork connected to an old company retirement plan. I accepted that answer. Another time, Susan thanked Michael at Thanksgiving for taking care of everything. I assumed she meant some problem with her store. Michael immediately changed the subject. Then there were the weekends. Every few months, Michael would say he was meeting former coworkers or going fishing. I never questioned him. Why would I? He was my husband, not my prisoner. Trust means giving someone room to live without constantly demanding proof of where they have been. At least, that was what I believed then. Michael placed the empty water bottle on the kitchen counter. "Can we please go to bed?" he asked. I stared at him. "Michael, I'm asking you one last time. What account was Susan talking about?" His jaw tightened. "She doesn't know what she's talking about, so there's no account." He looked at me for a second too long. Then he said, "Lisa, you're exhausted. We'll talk tomorrow." I should have noticed that he still hadn't answered. Instead, I watched him walk upstairs. For the first time in almost 39 years, I didn't follow my husband to bed. I sat alone at the kitchen table while the rain tapped against the windows. Around me was the life we had built. The same refrigerator we kept because Michael said a new one was unnecessary. The same faded curtains I had planned to replace after retirement. The same house where I had spent decades believing every sacrifice had been shared. And suddenly, one question sat heavier than all the others. If Michael had truly spent our marriage protecting our future, why had his own sister known about $300,000 that I had never heard of? That was when the memories stopped feeling innocent, and the silence in my house stopped feeling peaceful. I stayed at the kitchen table long after Michael went upstairs. The rain had softened to a steady tapping against the windows, but inside me, everything felt louder. Susan's voice. "There's over $300,000 in that account." Michael's silence, his refusal to answer, the way he had looked at his sister when she realized she had said too much. I tried to tell myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was an old business account. Maybe it belonged to Susan. Maybe Michael had access to it because he had helped her with paperwork. But every explanation I invented collapsed under the same question. If it was innocent, why hadn't he simply told me I finally went upstairs around 11? Michael was already in bed facing away from me. I changed quietly and lay down beside him. For nearly 39 years, his breathing had been one of the most familiar sounds in my life. That night, it irritated me. I stared at the ceiling. A few minutes later, Michael spoke. "Lisa," I didn't answer immediately. "You're overthinking this." I turned my head toward him. "Then explain it." He exhaled. "Susan is in trouble with her business. She panics. She exaggerates. That still doesn't explain why she mentioned an account. We'll talk tomorrow." "Why not now?" He rolled onto his back. "Because it's nearly midnight and I'm tired." Then he reached over and patted my arm as if I were a child who needed calming. "Get some sleep." That gesture disturbed me more than anger would have. I turned away from him. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Michael's breathing eventually deepened. I knew he was asleep. I wasn't going to be. Around midnight, I got out of bed. I told myself I only wanted a glass of water. That was technically true. I went downstairs barefoot, crossed the dark living room, and entered the kitchen. Michael's laptop was still sitting on the counter where he had left it earlier that evening. I noticed it immediately. I also noticed something else. The screen was glowing. A notification had appeared in the lower corner. I wasn't close enough to read the entire message, but I could clearly see a bank logo I didn't recognize. My heart started beating faster. I stopped walking. For several seconds, I simply stared at the computer. There are moments when you know the next decision will divide your life into a before and an after. That was one of them. I had never searched Michael's phone, never read his emails, never checked his browser history. I had always believed that trust meant respecting privacy. Even after Susan's outburst, part of me felt ashamed for considering touching his computer. Then I remembered the kitchen conversation. "So there's no account?" He had refused to answer. I stepped closer. The browser was open. Michael had apparently closed the laptop without signing out. A bank website filled the screen. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. There were several lines of numbers. A checking account, recent activity, available balance. I leaned closer. The account balance read $318,746.22. I whispered the number out loud. 318,000. My knees weakened. I pulled out a chair and sat down. For a moment, I truly thought I might be sick. $318,000. Not $30,000. Not $3,000. More than $300,000 sitting in an account I had never seen. I looked toward the staircase. The house was silent. My first instinct was to close the computer and walk away. Instead, I looked again. The account holder's name was Michael Martin, not Susan, not a business, my husband. I felt heat rise into my face. My hands started trembling. I clicked carefully through the account details. The account had been opened 11 years earlier. 11. I sat back and tried to calculate. 11 years ago, I had still been working full-time. Emily had been younger. Michael had still been several years from retirement. That was the same period when he had told me we needed to get serious about saving. I remembered standing in our kitchen one Saturday morning, holding a brochure for the Alaska cruise Carol had taken. I had joked that someday I wanted to see glaciers before my knees became too bad for long walks. Michael had smiled. Someday, sweetheart, we have to be responsible first. Responsible. The word made something twist inside me. I remembered replacing only 2 tires on my car because Michael said all 4 would be wasteful. I remembered buying a winter coat on clearance and feeling guilty because it cost more than I had planned. I remembered the year I decided not to update our kitchen because Michael insisted retirement had to come first. All those little sacrifices suddenly sat beside the number on the screen. 318,746.22. I wanted to wake him. I wanted to march upstairs, open the bedroom door, and demand an explanation. But something stopped me. Maybe it was fear. Maybe instinct. If Michael had hidden an account for 11 years, then one angry conversation would not uncover 11 years of truth. I needed to know what I was dealing with. I took out my phone. My hands shook so badly that the first picture came out blurry. I steadied myself and photographed the screen again. The balance, the account number, the opening date. Then I looked at the transaction history. There were transfers going back years. Some deposits were large. Others were surprisingly ordinary. Amounts like $2, $500, $4, $800, $7, $200. Then larger ones, $18,000, $25,000. I saw descriptions suggesting investment distributions and electronic transfers. I didn't fully understand all of them, but one name kept appearing on the outgoing side. Blake Ridge Holdings, LLC. I frowned. Blake, Susan's last name. I scrolled farther. Again. Blake Ridge Holdings, LLC. $6,400. Then another. $11,250. Then another several months later. I opened one transaction. The details told me almost nothing, just an electronic transfer. I took another photograph, then another. I kept scrolling. There were so many payments that I lost count. Some were years apart. Others came within weeks of each other. My heart pounded harder with each one. This was not a single loan. It was not one emergency. Whatever Blake Ridge Holdings LLC was, Michael had been sending it money for years. I heard a floorboard creak upstairs. I froze. The blood seemed to drain from my body. I closed the transaction window, then lowered the laptop screen until only a thin strip of light remained. I waited. Nothing. A minute passed, then another. Michael must have turned over in bed. I slowly opened the laptop again. There was one more thing I needed to see. I searched the transactions for Susan's name directly. Nothing obvious appeared, but Blake Ridge did, over and over. I whispered, "What did you do, Michael?" I felt ridiculous talking to an empty kitchen. But I no longer recognized the marriage around me. The man sleeping upstairs had apparently maintained a private financial world for more than a decade, and his sister knew enough about it to come to my house after dark, demanding money. I took several more photographs. I did not transfer a cent. I did not print anything. I did not change a password. Some instinct told me not to leave a trace of what I had seen. Finally, I returned the browser to the page I had first found. I lowered the laptop screen. Then I sat there with my phone in my hand. I opened the pictures. The numbers were still there. I had almost hoped I had misunderstood them. I hadn't. 300 T 746.22. 11 years. Blake Ridge Holdings, LLC. I went back upstairs just before 1 in the morning. Michael was asleep on his side. I stood in the doorway looking at him. This was the man who had held my hand when my mother died. The man who had taught Emily to ride a bicycle. The man who had stood beside me at our 35th anniversary dinner and told our friends that trust was the secret to a lasting marriage. I climbed into bed carefully. Michael didn't wake. I lay beside him, staring into the darkness. Only a few hours earlier, I had wondered whether Susan had misunderstood something. Now I knew she hadn't. The account existed. It had existed for 11 years. And somewhere inside those years was a company called Blake Ridge Holdings, LLC. I didn't yet know what it owned. I didn't know where the money had gone. I didn't know how Susan was involved. But for the first time that night, I understood one thing clearly. Whatever Michael had been hiding from me, it wasn't small. And I had only seen the first page of it. I slept for less than 2 hours that night. By 6 in the morning, I was already awake, staring at the gray light creeping through the bedroom curtains. Michael was still asleep beside me. For years, I had thought of his presence as reassuring. That morning, I felt as if I were lying next to a locked door. Behind it were 11 years I knew nothing about. I got out of bed quietly and went downstairs. The laptop was exactly where I had left it. For a long moment, I stood in the kitchen with my hand resting on the back of a chair. Part of me wanted to pretend I had never seen the account. That sounds foolish now. But when you have built nearly 4 decades of your life around one person, the truth can feel more dangerous than the lie. The lie still leaves your old life standing. The truth threatens to pull it apart. I made coffee and waited. Michael came downstairs 20 minutes later, wearing the old navy robe Emily had given him for Christmas. He looked completely ordinary. "Morning," he said. "Morning." He poured coffee. Then he looked out the window. "Looks like the rain finally stopped." I stared at him. How could he talk about the weather? How could a man have more than $300,000 hidden from his wife and still complain about wet leaves in the driveway? But I said nothing. Not yet. Michael ate toast, checked his phone, and told me he needed to run errands later. He did not mention Susan. He did not mention the account, and I realized something important. I believed he had survived the night. He thought Susan's mistake could be buried. That knowledge gave me patience. After breakfast, Michael showered and left the house shortly before 9. The moment his car disappeared down the street, I went back to the laptop. My heart still pounded when I opened it. This time, I moved slowly. I had already seen the balance. Now I wanted to understand the history. I went as far back as the online statements allowed. The oldest records showed smaller deposits, a company bonus, a transfer of $4,200, another for $6,000, an investment distribution. At first, the numbers seemed scattered. Then I started recognizing patterns. Certain deposits happened shorter. Michael received annual bonuses from work. I remembered those years. Michael would tell me the bonus had been rolled into investments or retirement savings. "We shouldn't touch it," he would say. I had been proud of him for being disciplined. Now, I was looking at money that appeared to have gone somewhere else. I opened another statement. There was a transfer from an account number I recognized, our joint savings. Caught. I checked again. There was no mistake. Several $1,000s had moved from our shared savings into the secret account. Not enough at one time to have caused an immediate crisis. Not enough that I would necessarily have noticed years later among normal household activity. But enough to matter. Then another transfer appeared months later, and another. The amounts grew. Michael had not emptied our accounts. He had done something much harder to notice. He had taken pieces, a little here, a little there, amounts small enough to disappear inside years of marriage. That realization frightened me more than one enormous withdrawal would have. This had required patience, planning, repetition. I kept scrolling. Then I began focusing on Blake Ridge Holdings, LLC. The name appeared again and again. Some transfers were direct payments. Others seemed connected to expenses. I saw one for property tax, another labeled insurance, then a payment to a contractor, landscaping, furniture, a loan payment. I wrote the amounts down on a yellow legal pad. $8,900, $12,400, $5,600, $17,000, $3,250. The list grew until I stopped thinking of them as numbers. They became evidence. Whatever Blake Holdings was, it was not a struggling boutique. It was connected to property, real property, expensive property. I found payments to the flooring company, a roofing contractor, a furniture retailer in Seneca, a landscaping service. My stomach tightened. Seneca was close to Lake Keowee. I knew that because Susan had talked about the area before. Years earlier, she had gone on and on about how beautiful the lake was. I had never thought much about it. Now, every casual conversation seemed suspicious. I kept reading. One payment in particular caught my attention. It was made to an insurance company and included a reference to residential coverage. Residential. I sat back. This is a house, I whispered. Not a business. Not inventory. Not some emergency loan for Susan's store. Michael had been helping finance a property. For years. I added up only the transfers I could easily identify. The total was already staggering, and I knew I had not found everything. My coffee sat untouched beside me. I didn't feel hungry. I felt hollow. Then I heard the garage door. Michael was home. I closed the statement immediately. My fingers moved so quickly that I nearly knocked over the coffee cup. I returned the screen to a neutral page and lowered the laptop lid. Seconds later, Michael entered through the kitchen door, carrying 2 grocery bags. "I picked up milk," he said. I looked at him. He smiled. "Just a normal husband bringing home groceries." "Thanks," I said. He set the bags down. "You okay?" There it was, my chance. I could have confronted him. Instead, I decided to give him one opportunity to tell me the truth without knowing what I had discovered. Michael, he turned. Yeah, I kept my voice calm. Have you ever kept an account from me? His expression barely changed, but I saw it. A pause. Not even a full second, just enough. What do you mean? Exactly what I said. He leaned against the counter. Where is this coming from last night? He sighed. Lisa, we already talked about Susan. No, you talked around Susan. He frowned. I continued. I'm asking you directly. Have you ever kept money somewhere I didn't know about? Michael looked straight into my eyes. No. My chest tightened. Never know. He stepped closer. Everything we have is ours. For a moment, I almost couldn't breathe. It was the confidence that hurt, not hesitation, not shame. He lied to me as easily as he had asked whether we needed milk. I had spent the entire morning hoping there might still be some explanation that allowed me to preserve part of the man I thought I knew. That hope disappeared with 4 words. Everything we have is ours. I nodded slowly. Michael studied my face. Are you sure you're okay? I'm fine. He reached for my hand. I let him touch it. That was harder than pulling away. He gave my fingers a reassuring squeeze. Don't let Susan's problems get inside your head. Then he started unpacking groceries. I watched him put eggs in the refrigerator, bread on the counter, coffee in the pantry. Ordinary things. After 39 years, I knew how to read the rhythm of his movements. And now, I knew something else. Michael wasn't simply avoiding a difficult conversation. He had chosen the lie. Directly. Deliberately. Even after I had given him the chance to tell me the truth. That changed something inside me. Until that morning, me had still been behaving like a wife, waiting for an explanation. Now I became a woman looking for facts. I would not accuse him without understanding the full picture. I would not allow anger to make me careless, and I would not let him convince me later that I had imagined what I saw. That afternoon, while Michael watched television in the den, I sat in the bedroom with my phone and reviewed the photographs I had taken. The secret account, the deposits, the transfers, Blake Ridge Holdings, LLC, property taxes, insurance, contractors, furniture, landscaping, loan payments. The pattern was undeniable. Michael had been funding a property for years, and Susan's name was connected to the company receiving the money. What I still didn't know was where that property was, or why my husband had believed it was worth 11 years of lies. But I intended to find out. The name Blake Ridge Holdings, LLC stayed in my mind all afternoon. Michael sat in the den, watching a golf tournament with the volume low, occasionally calling out comments about players I had never heard of. Every few minutes, I heard him shift in his recliner or set his coffee cup on the side table. He sounded relaxed. I was sitting less than 30 feet away, searching for evidence that my husband had spent 11 years building a financial life behind my back. There was something deeply unsettling about that contrast. I took my phone and went upstairs to the guest room. I closed the door quietly, sat on the edge of the bed, and typed the company name into a search engine. Blake Ridge Holdings, LLC. At first, the results were boring. Business registration information, a mailing address, dates, names. Then I found a property record. My heart started beating faster. The company was connected to a house near Lake Keowee. I clicked through this public information, slowly making sure I understood what I was seeing. The property had been purchased years earlier. Not last year. Not during Susan's most recent crisis. Years ago. There was Susan's name connected to the LLC. Susan Blake. I stared at it for several seconds. Then I searched the address. A real estate page appeared. The house was beautiful. Not enormous, but far beyond anything I would have described as modest. A wide porch, stone around the lower exterior. Tall windows facing the water. A private dock stretching to the lake. 3 bedrooms. Updated kitchen. Fireplace. Landscaped yard. The kind of place Michael and I had always called too much house whenever we passed something similar. I sat there staring at the photographs. Then anger rose in me so suddenly that I had to put my phone down. For years, Michael had told me we needed to be careful. For years, he had said our own kitchen could wait. Our furniture could wait. My trips could wait. But apparently, this house had not waited. I picked up my phone again. The property history showed renovations over time. My mind immediately went back to the transactions I had seen. Flooring, roofing, furniture, landscaping, insurance. The pieces fit together so neatly that I almost wished they didn't. I opened Susan's social media page. I had looked at it hundreds of times over the years without paying much attention. Susan posted constantly. Flowers from her boutique, pictures of meals, holiday decorations, customers holding shopping bags, weekend cocktails. I scrolled backward, several years. Then I stopped. There she was standing on a dock. Behind her was the same lake house. The caption read, "Perfect weekend escape." I stared. Escape from what certainly not from financial struggle, I thought bitterly. I kept scrolling. Another photo. Susan sitting beside a fire pit with 2 women I vaguely recognized. Same house. Another. Christmas wreaths on the porch. Another. A summer table set near the water. And then I saw Michael. My husband. He was standing near the dock holding a fishing rod. The photo had been posted 5 years earlier. I remembered that weekend. I remembered it perfectly. Michael had told me he was going fishing with a former coworker named Dave. He had packed a small overnight bag. I had even made sandwiches for the drive. I closed my eyes. At the time, there had been no reason to doubt him. Why would there be? A husband says he is going fishing. His wife tells him to have fun. That is what normal marriages look like. Except now, I was staring at proof that normal had been an illusion. I searched the dates on more photographs. A fall weekend 3 years earlier. Michael had told me he was attending a retirement dinner for someone from work. There he was, in the background of one of Susan's pictures, wearing the same brown jacket I remembered him leaving the house in. Another weekend. He had said he was helping an old friend repair a boat. There he was again. Lake Kiowa. I felt something worse than anger, humiliation. Not because strangers knew. Because I had been so easy to deceive. But almost immediately, another thought followed. No, I had not been foolish. I had trusted my husband. Those were not the same thing. Trust becomes dangerous only when someone chooses to abuse it. I kept scrolling. Then I noticed a dining table in one photograph. Dark wood, long, rustic style. I had seen a payment to a furniture retailer for almost $8,000. Another photo showed new outdoor furniture. Another showed updated flooring. Every image became connected to a number. Every smiling photograph seemed to carry a price tag taken from a life I thought belonged to Michael and me. I opened my notes and started adding the payments I had already documented. I did not have every transaction. Some were unclear. Some I could not trace. But the identifiable transfers related to Blake Ridge Holdings, were already well above $200,000. My hands went cold. More than $200,000. I tried to imagine what that amount meant in the context of our marriage. That was the kitchen renovation we never did, the vacations we postponed, the newer car I talked myself out of buying, the financial caution Michael praised me for. It was also something else. Time. All those years I had spent believing we had less freedom than we actually did. You can replace money. You cannot replace years. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. I locked my phone immediately. Michael knocked once and opened the door. "There you are?" I looked up. I was just resting. He smiled. "Thought maybe you'd fallen asleep." "No." He leaned against the doorframe. "Want to go out for dinner tonight?" The question almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because of the absurdity. My husband had secretly spent hundreds of thousands of dollars maintaining a lake property connected to his sister. And now he was standing in front of me, offering to buy dinner, as if that were the most important financial decision in our marriage. "Maybe," I said. Michael nodded. "There's that Italian place you like." For 1 second, I looked at his face and remembered younger versions of us. Michael at 30. Michael holding baby Emily. Michael painting our first nursery. Michael sitting beside me in a hospital waiting room when my father was sick. People imagine betrayal turns love into hatred instantly. It doesn't. Sometimes love stays in the room long after trust has left. That is what makes betrayal so painful. "I'll let you know," I said. Michael walked away. I waited until his footsteps disappeared down the hall. Then I opened my phone again. I found another photograph of the lake house. It had been posted after a small renovation. Susan stood in the kitchen, smiling beside a marble island. The caption said, "Finally feels like home. Home." I read the word 3 times. Then I looked around our guest room. The paint on one wall was fading. We had discussed repainting it the previous spring. Michael had said there was no reason to spend money when the room was barely used. I nearly cried. Instead, I saved the property information and took screenshots of Susan's photographs. By evening, I had enough to understand the basic truth. Blake Ridge Holdings, LLC owned or controlled the Lake Keowee property. Susan was connected to it. Michael had been sending money toward it for years. He had spent weekends there while lying to me about where he was going, and he had done all of it while insisting we lived cautiously because retirement demanded sacrifice. At breakfast the next morning, Michael sat across from me reading the local news on his tablet. "Eggs are getting ridiculous again," he said. I looked at him. "What the prices? Everything costs more." He shook his head. "We really should watch our grocery spending." I almost dropped my coffee cup. There it was again. That performance. That careful, responsible husband who worried about $10 extra at the grocery store while hundreds of thousands had disappeared into a lake house I never knew existed. I studied him over the rim of my cup. For the first time in 39 years, I wondered where Michael Martin ended and the performance began. And there was still one question I could not answer. Why? Why would my husband risk our marriage, our finances, and my trust to support that house? I knew Susan depended on him. But this was far beyond helping a sister through a hard time. Something bigger was holding those two together. And I intended to find out what it was. I waited 2 days before contacting Susan. Those 2 days felt longer than some years of my marriage. Michael carried on as though nothing had happened. He watered the tomato plants behind the house, complained about a squeaking cabinet hinge, and asked me whether I wanted chicken or salmon for dinner. I answered him normally. That was the strangest part. Once you begin hiding your own knowledge from someone who has been hiding the truth from you, marriage becomes a kind of theater. Michael thought he was protecting his secret. I was protecting the fact that I had found it. On Thursday morning, after he left to meet an old coworker for coffee, I called Susan. She answered on the third ring. Lisa. Her voice sounded cautious. I think we should talk. There was silence. About what I almost admired the attempt. You know what? Another pause. Then she sighed. All right. We agreed to meet at a small cafe across town, somewhere Michael was unlikely to appear. I arrived first and chose a table near the back. Susan came in 10 minutes later, wearing cream-colored pants and a navy blouse, looking much more composed than she had the night she arrived at my house, soaked in rain. She sat across from me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said, So he finally told you. I felt something inside me sharpen. I had not told her what Michael had admitted, because Michael had admitted nothing. I folded my hands in my lap. How much did he tell you? I knew. Susan blinked. What, Michael? How much did he tell you I knew? Her expression changed. Only slightly, but enough. Lisa, I don't want to get in the middle of your marriage. I almost laughed. You've been in the middle of my marriage for 11 years. She looked down at the table. I let the silence stretch. That was something I had learned from years of working with children. People often rush to fill silence when they become uncomfortable. Susan was no different. Finally, she said, Michael always told me you knew. I stared at her. Knew what the arrangement. What arrangement? She shifted in her chair. The financial help. The property. All of it. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice steady. I told you I knew about the Lake Keowee house. Susan's eyes widened. That was the moment she realized I knew more than she had expected. Yes, she said carefully. For how long, I don't know. Years. Did he tell you I approved of it? She rubbed her thumb against the edge of her coffee cup. He said you didn't like discussing investments. I felt heat rise through my chest. That isn't what I asked. Susan looked away. I repeated the question. Did Michael tell you I approved? He said you knew he was helping me. Susan. All right. Her voice became sharper. He said you understood, but preferred not to get involved. I sat back. The lie was bigger than I thought. Michael had not merely kept me ignorant. He had used my supposed approval to make his deception easier for everyone else. What exactly was he helping you with? I asked. Susan exhaled slowly. The house. How much I don't know the exact number. That's not believable. Her mouth tightened. Michael handled most of the payments, property taxes. She looked at me. Sometimes, insurance. Yes. Renovations, some. Furniture. She didn't answer. I already had my answer. I leaned closer. Susan, I found payments for landscaping contractors' insurance, furniture, and loans. So don't sit here and make this sound like Michael helped you replace a water heater once. She stared at me. For the first time, her confidence cracked. You went through his accounts? Interesting. Not our accounts. His. I know enough, I said. Susan looked toward the cafe window. Mom asked him to look after me. There it was. The justification. Their mother had died more than a decade earlier. Michael had always been close to her. She asked him to look after you, I said. Did she ask him to lie to his wife? That's not fair. No, then explain what is fair. Susan's face hardened. You never understood what it was like for me. I said nothing. My business struggled. My divorce cost me almost everything. Michael knew I needed stability, and a lake house was stability. It was an investment I helped pay for without knowing it. Susan flinched. I continued. While Michael told me we couldn't afford vacations, he was paying for your landscaping. That wasn't my decision. You accepted the money because he offered it, and you believed his wife knew. I believed what my brother told me. Her tone was defensive now. Perhaps part of that was true. Perhaps at first she really had believed him, but not forever. The night at my house told me that much. She had said, "I thought you knew." Not Michael told me you knew. There was guilt in that sentence. I changed direction. Why did you come to the house that night? Susan's expression closed immediately. I told you. I needed Michael. For what? A payment. What payment? She looked down. Susan, it's complicated, so simplify it. Her jaw tightened. There's a loan connected to the property. I already knew that, but I let her continue. We've had some problems. What kind of problems? Cash flow. With the house. With everything. She rubbed her forehead. Michael usually takes care of a certain payment. This time, he didn't. How much? I don't want to discuss numbers. You came to my house at night demanding access to $300,000. We are well past the point where you get to be private about numbers. That silenced her. Finally, she said, the payment is substantial, and if it isn't made? She looked at me. We could lose the property. There it was. Not a minor inconvenience, not a late bill. The lake house was in real danger. Why did Michael stop paying? I don't know. You must have asked. He said he needed time. For what? Susan hesitated. He said things were changing. My pulse quickened. What things? He's retired now. The money isn't moving the same way. That made sense. Michael's salary and bonuses had ended. Perhaps the system he had maintained for years was becoming harder to sustain. Susan continued. He said he had another plan. What plan? She shook her head. I don't know the details. I watched her carefully. That isn't true. Susan looked annoyed. You always do that. Do what? Look at people like you know exactly what they're thinking. I spent 30 years helping children find books they swore weren't on the shelf. I got good at noticing when people were avoiding the obvious. Despite everything, she almost smiled. Then the smile disappeared. I asked again, what was Michael's plan? Susan stared at her untouched coffee. He talked about using equity. My stomach tightened. Equity from what? She realized too late that she had said too much. Susan. She pushed her chair back slightly. I shouldn't have said anything. Equity from what? She looked around the cafe as if Michael might somehow be standing behind her. Then she lowered her voice. He said the Greenville house would solve everything. For a second, I didn't understand. Then I did. The Greenville house. My house. The home where Emily had grown up. The home Michael and I had spent decades paying for. I felt suddenly cold. What exactly did he say? Susan shook her head. You need to ask Michael. No, I'm asking you. He said there was enough value in the house that things could be reorganized. Reorganized, that was his word. Did he say sell it? No. Refinance? I don't know. Borrow against it? She stayed silent. That silence told me enough. I stood. Susan looked up at me. Lisa, wait. I picked up my purse. One more question. She looked exhausted now. When Michael told you I knew about the lake house, did you ever ask me? Susan opened her mouth, then closed it. No. Why her eyes dropped? Because deep down she had not wanted the answer. I could see that clearly now. Maybe years earlier, Susan had believed Michael's version. Maybe she had convinced herself I was simply the quiet wife who preferred not to know. But somewhere along the way, she must have realized the truth, and the money was too useful to question. I left the cafe without finishing my coffee. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright enough to make me squint. Cars moved through the intersection. People walked into stores. The world looked painfully normal. But one sentence followed me all the way home. The Greenville house would solve everything. Michael had already taken money from a life I thought we shared. Now I had reason to believe he was considering the house itself, and for the first time, my fear became larger than the secret account. I needed to know exactly what my husband was planning before he had the chance to put a pen in my hand. For the rest of that afternoon, I kept hearing Susan's words. The Greenville house would solve everything. I had lived in that house for more than 30 years. Emily learned to walk in the hallway. Michael and I had painted the living room ourselves after we first moved in because we couldn't afford to hire anyone. There were pencil marks inside the pantry door showing Emily's height at 7, 9, 11, and 13. My mother had spent her final Christmas there. That house was not simply an asset on a spreadsheet. It was the physical record of my adult life, and Michael had apparently been discussing its value as if it were a financial tool he alone could activate. By the time I reached home, I had made a decision. I needed to see what he had planned. Michael's car was not in the driveway. He had texted earlier that he was meeting someone from his old company and might not be back until late afternoon. For once, I was grateful for his absence. I went inside, locked the door behind me, and stood in the foyer, listening to the silence. Then I walked toward Michael's office. His office had always been his territory. Not forbidden exactly, but understood. The desk was dark walnut heavy and old-fashioned. He kept tax documents, insurance papers, investment statements, and warranties in labeled folders. I had been inside hundreds of times, but I had never searched it. Even after finding the secret account crossing that doorway, with the intention of looking through his papers, made me uncomfortable. I hated what his deception was turning me into. Then, I reminded myself of something. I was not searching for gossip. I was trying to understand whether my husband intended to put our home at financial risk without telling me the truth. That was not curiosity. That was self-protection. I started with the obvious drawers: receipts, old tax documents, vehicle records. Nothing. The bottom drawer was locked. I stared at it. Michael kept a small ring of spare keys in the top drawer of his filing cabinet. I knew that because I had seen him use them before. The third key opened it. Inside were several neatly organized folders. One was labeled property, another retirement options, and a third home equity. My heart began pounding. I pulled out the home equity folder first. There were brochures from 2 lenders, rate sheets, printed calculations, and beneath them, a preliminary application. I sat down in Michael's desk chair. The property address was ours. I read every line slowly. Estimated property value, current mortgage balance, available equity, requested financing amount. It was not a completed loan. That mattered. There was no final approval, and I saw spaces where my information and signature would be required. A wave of relief passed through me. Michael had not yet legally committed the house without me, but the relief lasted only seconds, because the paperwork proved Susan had told the truth. He was planning something. There were handwritten notes in the margin. Consolidate, better rate, use after roof discussion. I stared at those last words. After roof discussion. 3 weeks earlier, Michael had brought up our roof at breakfast. It was not leaking. It probably had several years left. But he had said we should start thinking ahead. If we ever need major work, he had told me it could make sense to finance everything together. At the time, I barely paid attention. Then a week later, he brought up home equity. Not directly. I had been watching television when a commercial mentioned refinancing. People let too much money just sit in their houses, he said casually. I remember laughing. Money sitting in a house sounds safer than money sitting in a casino. Michael smiled. You're too conservative. 2 days after that, he mentioned consolidating expenses. At the time, each conversation had seemed unrelated. Now I saw the pattern. He had been preparing me. Not with one big lie, with small ideas. A roof. A better interest rate. Unlocking equity. Consolidation. Words designed to make future paperwork seem ordinary. My stomach turned. I took photographs of every page. Then I opened the property folder. That was where the Lake Keowee documents were. There were loan statements tied to Blake Ridge Holdings, LLC. Property insurance, tax records, invoices, and a spreadsheet Michael had created himself. Columns of numbers ran across the page. Outstanding balance, monthly obligations, maintenance, projected sale value, equity. Then I saw the total debt connected to the property. I read it twice. Susan had made the situation sound serious. She had not made it sound this serious. The lake house was carrying far more than I had realized. The secret account could not simply solve the problem forever. Even the 308 times 746 sitting there would eventually disappear if Michael kept feeding the property. I found another page with calculations comparing the lake debt to the available equity in our Greenville home. That was the moment the plan became clear. Michael was not merely considering borrowing against our house for repairs. He was calculating whether our home could rescue the lake property. I put my hand over my mouth. For decades, he had told me our house represented security. We'll always have the house, he used to say. When we're old, we won't have to worry. Now he was considering using that security to protect something he had hidden from me. I kept reading. One handwritten note said, Lisa may agree if presented as consolidation plus an improvements. I stopped breathing for a second. There it was. My name. Not as a partner, as an obstacle to manage. I imagined Michael sitting at this desk, deciding which explanation would make me sign. Would he have put the papers in front of me at breakfast? Would he have pointed to the roof? Would he have said it was simply responsible retirement planning? Would I have signed? That question frightened me most. A month earlier, I probably would have, because I trusted him. I took another photograph, then another. I forced myself to stay methodical. Carol's voice came into my mind, though I had not yet told her what was happening. She had spent years as a paralegal, and often said that when people panicked, they touched things they shouldn't touch and said things they couldn't take back. So, I did neither. I did not take the original documents. I did not write on them. I did not move money. I only photographed what I found. Then I returned every page to the exact order. The home equity application went beneath the brochures. The property folder went back beside retirement options. I locked the drawer. I replaced the key. Then I sat in Michael's chair for several minutes, staring at the family photograph on his desk. It had been taken at Emily's wedding. Michael stood beside me with one arm around my waist. We looked happy. Maybe we were. That was the part I still could not understand. How could a man love me in some moments and still build plans that required deceiving me in others? I heard a car door outside. Michael. I stood quickly. By the time he entered through the kitchen, I was in the living room folding a blanket. Hey, he called. Hi. He walked in carrying a hardware store bag. picked up sealant for the back window. I nodded. Then he added casually, "We should probably talk about the roof sometime this week." My hands stopped moving. He didn't notice. "I've been thinking we could bundle some improvements together," he continued. "Might make financial sense." There it was, exactly as the note had suggested. I looked at him and smiled faintly. "Maybe." Michael seemed pleased. "No rush. We'll sit down with the numbers." The numbers. For years, I had believed those words meant he was protecting us. Now I understood they meant something else. He had a plan. He had paperwork. And if Susan had not appeared at my door that rainy night, I might never have known what my signature was really being used to save. That evening, while Michael watched television, I went upstairs and backed up every photograph I had taken. The account, the transfers, the lake house documents, the home equity application, and especially the handwritten note with my name on it. Because I finally understood that this was no longer just about discovering what Michael had done. It was about making sure he could not rewrite the truth once I confronted him. And I knew I could not carry that truth alone much longer. I called Emily the next morning. For nearly an hour before I did, I sat at the kitchen table with my phone beside my coffee and tried to convince myself not to involve her. She was 38 years old, a registered nurse with long shifts, a husband, and a family of her own. I had spent most of her life trying to protect her from adult problems that did not belong to her. But this was no longer just a disagreement between Michael and me. He had hidden money. I had lied about the lake house. He had considered using our home to rescue it. And somewhere along the way, I had begun to suspect that other people in our family might have been told a version of my life that I had never heard. Emily answered quickly. "Mom, everything okay?" Just hearing her voice made my throat tighten. "Are you working today? Not until tonight. Could I come by?" There was a pause. "Of course. What happened? I'd rather tell you in person." Her voice changed immediately. "Is Dad okay?" That question hurt. "Yes," I said. "He's fine. Fit, at least." An hour later, I was sitting in Emily's living room. She brought me tea, even though I hadn't asked for any. That was something she got from me. When you don't know how to solve someone's pain, you make them something warm. Emily sat across from me. "Mom, you're scaring me." I opened my purse and took out my phone. "I need you to listen before you ask questions." Her face became serious. So I started at the beginning. Susan arriving in the rain. The $300,000. Michael refusing to answer. The laptop. The account balance. 310,746.22. Emily's mouth fell open. I continued. 11 years. Blake Ridge Holdings, LLC. The property at Lake Keowee. The transfers. The photographs of Michael at the house. The home equity paperwork. The handwritten note about presenting it to me as consolidation and improvements. By the time I finished, Emily had tears in her eyes. She covered her mouth with one hand. "Oh my God." I waited. She looked at the photographs again. Then she said something I did not expect. I knew there was a lake house. My entire body went still. "What?" Emily shook her head quickly. "Not like this. Mom, I swear not like this." I stared at her. "You knew I thought you knew too." That sentence again. Susan had said almost the same thing. I felt suddenly exhausted. Why would you think that Emily leaned forward? Because Dad told me. The room seemed to shrink around us. When, a few years ago, she wiped her eyes. I saw him there once. My stomach tightened. Where at the lake house? Emily took a breath. Ryan and I were driving back from Clemson after visiting friends. We stopped near the lake because he wanted coffee. I saw Dad's truck outside a place nearby. I didn't think much of it at first, and then I called him. Her voice became quieter. He said he was helping Aunt Susan with some property. I stared at her. What exactly did he say about me? He said he was helping Aunt Susan with some property. I stared at her. What exactly did he say about me? Emily looked ashamed. He said you knew about it but didn't like discussing money. I closed my eyes. There it was again. The same story. The same version of me. Lisa knows. Lisa doesn't want details. Lisa gets nervous about finances. Lisa prefers Michael to handle it. A woman who existed only because Michael needed her to exist. Emily continued. Hy told me not to bring it up because you got anxious whenever people talked about investments. I opened my eyes. Did you believe him? Yes. The answer came immediately. Then she started crying. I'm so sorry. I moved beside her. No, Mom. No, Emily. I took her hand. You are not responsible for a lie your father told you. But I should have asked. You trusted him. The words came out before I realized their weight. You trusted him, just like I had. Emily looked down. There were other things. A cold feeling spread through my chest. What things? She hesitated. Dad used to tell me not to talk to you about certain financial stuff. Like what? He helped us once. With what? When Ryan lost ours during the hospital expansion project. I remembered that period. Emily and her husband had struggled for several months. Michael told me he had loaned them a small amount from money he had set aside. How much? 10,000. I blinked. Michael had told me 5. Emily saw my expression. He told you something different. Yes. She looked sick. I thought you knew. Again, those 3 words were becoming the architecture of my marriage. I thought you knew. Susan thought I knew. Emily thought I knew. Everyone had been given just enough information to believe there was nothing worth questioning. Michael had not only hidden numbers, Hy had divided the truth into separate rooms and made sure none of us compared notes. Emily leaned back against the sofa. Dad always said you worried too much about money. I gave a bitter little laugh. That's convenient. I never thought about it like that. Neither did I. She looked at me. Do you remember when I asked you about Aunt Susan's lake place, maybe 2 Christmases ago? I searched my memory. Then something returned. Emily had mentioned Susan spending New Year's at the lake. I assumed she meant a rental or a friend's property. Michael had immediately changed the subject to dessert. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now I could see the mechanics. Interrupt. Redirect. Minimize. Move on. It had worked because none of us expected deception. Emily squeezed my hand. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. Are you going to confront him eventually? She shook her head. Not until you have everything. Her tone surprised me. It was not emotional. It was clinical. The nurse in her had taken over. Mom, if he's been hiding money for 11 years, you need copies of everything before he knows how much you've found. I've taken pictures. Back them up somewhere he can't access. I already did. Good. She wiped her face. And please don't sign anything. I won't. Not even if he says it's routine. I know. Emily looked toward the window. I can't believe Dad did this. Neither could I. That was still the strange part. Evidence does not make disbelief disappear immediately. Sometimes your mind understands before your heart does. I looked at my daughter and suddenly realized Michael's secrecy had stolen something else from me. Conversations, years of them. Moments Emily might have shared if she had not been told I was too anxious to handle the truth. That hurt in a different way. I need someone who understands documents, I said. Emily nodded. What about Carol? I had been thinking the same thing. Carol Bennett had been my friend for more than 20 years. Before retiring, she had worked as a paralegal for a small law office in Greenville. She was practical to the point of irritation sometimes, which was exactly what I needed. I called her that afternoon. I did not tell her everything over the phone, only that I had discovered serious financial information. Michael had kept from me and needed help understanding what to preserve. Carol asked one question. Are you safe? Yes. Then don't do anything dramatic. That sounded like Carol. We met later that day. I showed her the photographs. She studied them without interrupting. When she finished, she placed my phone on the table. Lisa, I'm not your lawyer. I know, and I'm not going to tell you what legal outcome this means. I understand. But I can tell you something from 28 years of watching people panic. I waited. Keep records. Keep dates. Keep copies. Don't alter documents. Don't move money because you're angry. And before you make any major financial decision, get proper professional advice. I nodded. Carol reached across the table. And stop thinking that gathering facts makes you disloyal. That nearly broke me, because that was exactly what I had been feeling, as if protecting myself somehow made me the one damaging the marriage. I feel like I'm spying on my own husband. Carol's expression softened. You asked him directly if he had hidden money. Yes. And he lied, yes. Then the problem started before you opened a folder. I looked away. For the first time since Susan came to my door, I felt something close to steadiness. Not peace. Not yet. But support. Emily knew. Carol knew enough to help me stay careful. I was no longer carrying Michael's secret alone. When I returned home that evening, he was in the kitchen cutting vegetables. He smiled when I walked in. There you are. I was wondering where you went. Spent time with Emily. How is she good? Michael nodded. Tell her I said hello. I watched him slice a bell pepper as if nothing in our family had changed. He still believed the walls between us were intact. He did not know Susan had told me more. I did not know I had found the papers. He did not know Emily and I had compared memories. He did not know Carol had seen copies. For 11 years, Michael had controlled the story by keeping each of us in a separate room. That evening, for the first time, those doors had begun to open. And once we started talking to one another, his version of the truth was becoming harder to protect. For the next several days, I became obsessed with old records. Not because I enjoyed it, because I needed to understand one question that had begun to consume me. Whose money had Michael been hiding? He had always spoken as though the money he managed belonged to some distant financial world I did not need to understand. Investments, bonuses, distributions, retirement allocations, words that sounded technical enough to make me step back. For years, I had accepted that division. I handled our daily life. Michael handled the future. But now, I knew that somewhere inside that arrangement, he had built a private account worth more than $300,000 and directed enormous amounts towards Susan's lake property. I needed to know whether that money had truly been his alone. Carol had advised me to gather records carefully, so I started with boxes in the hall closet, old tax returns, bank statements, retirement summaries, documents we had kept because Michael always insisted good records mattered. The irony was almost unbearable. For decades, I had helped him organize the very paperwork that could now expose what he had done. I worked at the dining room table while Michael was out. I created 3 piles: joint accounts, investment statements, Michael's work compensation. At first, the numbers blurred together. Then patterns began to appear. One statement from 9 years earlier showed an investment distribution deposited into our joint account. 2 days later, a nearly identical amount disappeared through an electronic transfer. I checked my photographs from the secret account. There it was, the same amount, deposited into Michael's hidden account. I stared at both documents side by side. There was no reasonable explanation. That money had passed through our joint finances before disappearing into a place I did not know existed. I found another example, then another: a tax refund, a company bonus, a dividend payment. Money Michael had told me was being rolled back into retirement. Except some of it had not gone into retirement. It had gone into his second account. My hands began shaking. I thought back to those years. Michael received a large performance bonus one December. I remembered because I suggested we use a small portion to replace our old refrigerator. The freezer had stopped sealing properly, and I was tired of putting towels beneath it whenever ice melted. Michael had laughed gently. Let's not start spending just because money came in. I had agreed. We bought a repair kit instead. That bonus appeared in the records, and part of it had gone to the hidden account. Another year, we received an investment distribution larger than expected. I had asked whether we could finally take a proper vacation. Michael told me it had already been reinvested. Future Lisa will thank us. I remembered those exact words. Future Lisa. I had smiled. I had believed him. Now I found a transfer matching part of that distribution. It had gone to the secret account. Future Lisa had not been protected. She had been lied to. I kept going. The numbers did not show Michael draining our joint savings overnight. That would have been obvious. Instead, he moved money in pieces. 5,000, 7,000, 12,000, sometimes less. Enough to build something substantial over time, without creating one moment dramatic enough for me to question. It was careful. That was the word that kept coming back to me. Careful. Michael had always praised himself for being careful with money. Now I understood just how careful he had been. I took out a calculator. I added only the transfers I could clearly trace to marital funds. Then I checked the total twice. It already exceeded $250,000. More than $250,000. And that did not include every payment. It did not include everything that had flowed directly from his work compensation during our marriage. It did not include returns I could not fully trace. It did not include the money that had already left the secret account for Blake Ridge Holdings. I sat back in my chair. For a long time, I did nothing. I simply looked around the dining room. The table had scratches near one corner from when Emily used to do homework there. One dining chair had been repaired twice. The wallpaper was slightly faded. None of those things had bothered me before. We had lived modestly because I believed modesty was protecting us. Now, every ordinary object in the room seemed to ask the same question. Did we really need to sacrifice that much? I remembered needing dental work several years earlier. It was not urgent, but the dentist had suggested a crown before the tooth became worse. The cost made me hesitate. Michael told me the timing was bad. Can you wait until next year? I did. I remembered keeping the same washing machine long after it began making a terrible grinding sound because Michael said replacing it too soon would be wasteful. I remembered watching travel programs about Alaska and telling myself there would be time later. I remembered helping Emily with childcare instead of traveling after I retired because I believed we needed to keep our spending low. None of those choices had felt tragic at the time. That was what made them hurt now. I had made them willingly, but I had made them using false information. That was the betrayal I was finally beginning to understand. Michael had not only hidden money, he had shaped my decisions by convincing me we had less freedom than we truly did. He let me deny myself things while knowing another financial reality existed. I walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of water. My reflection in the window looked older than I felt. For years, I had thought financial betrayal meant someone gambling away savings or secretly maxing out credit cards. This was different. Michael had created scarcity where there did not need to be scarcity. He had controlled what I believed we could afford. And because I trusted him, I had built my choices around his version of reality. I returned to the records. There was one more thing bothering me. The current hidden balance was $310 down $746.22. But based on the deposits and transfers I was tracing, the account had once held much more. I started comparing older statements with the payment history I had photographed. At one point, several years earlier, the balance had clearly been significantly higher. Money had moved out. Some of it went to Blake Ridge Holdings. Some payments I recognized. Others were less clear. I wrote one sentence on my legal pad. Where did the rest go? Then I underlined it. That afternoon, Michael came home earlier than expected. I gathered the papers quickly, but did not panic. Carol had taught me something important. Fear makes people sloppy. I placed everything back into their folders and carried them upstairs. When I returned, Michael was standing in the kitchen. "What have you been doing all day?" he asked. "Sorting old paperwork." He smiled. "You voluntarily, normally, I would have laughed. Instead, I said, I thought it was time I understood some of it better." Something flickered across his face. Then he smiled again. "Sure. If you want, I can walk you through the investment sometime." I looked at him. For a second, I wanted to ask him whether that lesson would include the account with 300 TD. Instead, I smiled. That would be helpful. Michael opened the refrigerator. "We should probably simplify things eventually anyway." Simplify. Another harmless-sounding word. I wondered how many lies in our marriage had been hidden behind ordinary language. That evening, after he went to bed, I sat alone in the living room with my notes. More than $250,000 from money connected to our shared life had been diverted into a financial system I never approved, and the account had once contained even more. I was no longer asking whether Michael had betrayed me. That question had been answered. Now I needed to know the full scale of it. Because the money was not simply his. It came from years when we were married. Years when I worked. Years when I saved. Years when I believed every sacrifice was for both of us. The money was ours, and Michael had made decisions about it as if I did not exist. I waited 3 more days before confronting Michael. Not because I doubted what I had found. By then, doubt was gone. I had photographs of the secret account, records of transfers, documents connected to Blake Ridge Holdings, LLC, the Lake Keowee property, the home equity paperwork, and enough old financial records to understand that the money Michael had hidden did not exist outside our marriage. It had come from the life we built together. What I needed now was control. For almost 2 weeks, Michael had controlled the pace of every conversation by deciding what to reveal and what to deny. I was finished allowing that. On Friday evening, I made dinner as usual. Roast chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes. It felt strange to prepare a meal for a man I was about to confront about 11 years of deception. Michael came into the kitchen shortly after 6. "Smells good." "Thanks." He kissed my cheek. I stood completely still. There had been a time when that small gesture would have made me smile automatically. Now I wondered whether he noticed that I no longer leaned toward him. We ate with the television off. Michael talked about a former co-worker who was considering moving to Florida. I listened. I answered when necessary. Then when he finished eating, I said, "Don't clear the table yet." He looked at me. "Why, I want to show you something." I walked into the living room and returned with a folder. Inside were printed copies of several photographs and statements. Not everything, just enough. I placed the first page on the table, the secret bank account. Michael looked down. His face changed instantly. Not dramatically. Michael was too controlled for that, but the color left his cheeks. He looked up at me. "Where did you get this?" I had expected anger. Instead, I felt calm. "That's your first question, Lisa." "No. Your first question should be why your wife had to discover this instead of hearing about it from you." He stared at the statement. The balance was printed clearly. $310,746.22. Michael leaned back. "It's not what you think." I almost laughed. That sentence should be printed on a warning label. I'm serious. So am I. He rubbed his forehead. "It's a reserve account. A reserve for what different things?" "Name one." He looked irritated. "Emergencies, investments, family obligations." "Family obligations?" "Yes." I placed another page on the table. A transfer to Blake Ridge Holdings, LLC. Then another. Then a property tax payment. Michael's expression tightened. I watched him carefully. "Do you still want to call it a reserve?" He said nothing. I added another sheet. Lake Keowee, the property information. Susan's connection to Blake Ridge Holdings. Michael looked at me, and for the first time, I saw that he understood how much I knew. You went digging through everything. There it was. Not remorse, not apology, accusation. I asked you directly whether you had hidden an account from me. That doesn't give you the right to invade every piece of financial paperwork I have. I stared at him. You told me everything we had was ours. It is. Then why was I not allowed to know this existed? Michael stood and began pacing near the kitchen counter. You're twisting this. No, Michael. I am untwisting it. He turned sharply. I helped Susan. Yes, she needed help. For 11 years, he exhaled heavily. You know what she has been through. I know what you told me she went through. She lost a lot after her divorce. So, you bought her a lake house. I did not buy her a lake house. You paid the taxes. He looked away. You paid insurance. No answer. You paid contractors. Silence. You paid for furniture. He turned back toward me. I helped maintain an asset. The word asset almost made me angry enough to stand. An asset. Yes. For whom? For the family. I repeated the phrase slowly. The family. That property has value. So does our house. Lisa, stop acting like the money disappeared into nothing. The lake property is worth something. And why did I not know about this valuable family asset? He dragged a hand through his hair. Because I knew how you would react. There was the sentence. Not quite the full confession yet. I waited. Michael continued. You've always been conservative about money. Careful. Too careful sometimes. I stared at him. The woman who lived carefully because her husband told her she had to. He ignored that. You would have said no. I felt something in me settle. Say that again. What, you hid it because you knew I would say no. Michael looked at me. He knew what he had admitted. Yes, he said finally. I knew you would say no. The room became very quiet. I folded my hands on the table. Then you knew I did not agree. You would not have understood the situation. Understanding and agreeing are not the same thing. Susan is my sister, and I am your wife. My mother asked me to look after her. I have heard that excuse. It is not an excuse. Did your mother ask you to lie to me? Michael's jaw tightened. You always resented how much I helped Susan. No, I resented being told we could not afford things while you spent hundreds of thousands of dollars behind my back. His voice rose. You make it sound like I was buying yachts and gambling. You bought silence. His face hardened. That's dramatic. No. Dramatic would be throwing plates. I'm sitting here showing you statements. He looked at the papers as if they were the enemy. I continued. Do you know what hurt most? Michael said nothing. You watched me postpone things. You watched me worry about spending. You told me retirement had to come first, and all that time you knew this money existed. I was protecting our future. Whose future? He leaned forward. Ours. Then explain the home equity paperwork. Michael froze. That was the first moment I saw real panic. I reached into the folder and placed the preliminary application on the table. Then the photograph of his handwritten note. Lisa may agree if presented as consolidation plus in improvements. Michael stared at it. I asked quietly, were you planning to tell me what I was actually signing? It never got that far. That is not an answer. I was considering options. Using our house to rescue Susan's lake property. That is not how I would describe it. How would you describe it? He sat down again. For several seconds, he looked older than 67. We could have consolidated debt, improved this house, freed up cash, and sent money to Lake Kiowa, if necessary. I shook my head. You were going to make it sound like home improvement. I would have explained everything before anything became final. I looked directly at him. No, you wouldn't. His eyes narrowed. You don't know that. I know you had 11 years to explain the account. That silenced him. I took a breath. Why did you do this, Michael? He looked tired now. I told you, Susan needed help. That explains the first check. Maybe the second. It does not explain 11 years. He looked toward the dark window. Then he said the property wasn't supposed to be a burden forever. What was it supposed to be? Something useful. To whom? To all of us. I waited. He continued reluctantly. It could become a family place. A family place. Yes. Were Emily and I ever going to be told eventually? That word struck me harder than I expected. Eventually. I had postponed so much of my life for eventually. Eventually, we would travel. Eventually, we would replace things. Eventually, retirement would feel comfortable. Now, apparently, I was eventually going to be informed that my husband had built a second financial future without me. Michael leaned forward. Lisa, once the property stabilized, you might have seen the value. You mean once it was too late for me to say no? He frowned. You always assume the worst when it comes to Susan. No, I am assuming exactly what the documents show. His frustration broke through. You never liked her. That is not true. You judged her. I questioned why she constantly needed money. She had a harder life than you. That sentence hurt more than it should have. a harder life. You had stability. I had stability because I worked for it. So did I. And then you secretly redirected it. Michael pushed back from the table. You are determined to make me the villain. I looked at him for a long moment. No, Michael. I am asking you to stop making me the fool. His expression changed. For 1 second, I saw shame. Then it disappeared behind defensiveness. The lake house was supposed to become something for the family, he said again. I looked at the account statement, the transfers, the home equity plan, the note with my name on it. Then I asked the question that had been growing inside me for days. Which family, Michael? He stared at me. I waited. He opened his mouth, then closed it. That silence told me there was still something he had not said. Something beyond helping Susan. Something beyond the money. And for the first time since this began, I realized Michael's secret plan had not only been about the past. He had been planning a future that included the lake house, a future he had never discussed with me. And judging by the look on his face, I was beginning to understand why. Susan came to my house the following afternoon. Michael had left early that morning after sleeping in the guest room for the first time in our marriage. Neither of us had suggested it. He simply took a pillow from our bedroom, carried it down the hall, and closed the door behind him. That small sound, the click of the guest room door, felt more final than any argument we had ever had. By breakfast, he was gone. He left a note beside the coffee maker. Need some space. We'll talk later. Later. That word again. I folded the note in half and put it in a drawer. Around 2 o'clock, someone knocked hard on the front door. When I opened it, Susan stood on the porch holding a thick manila envelope against her chest. She did not look frightened this time. She looked furious. Is Michael here? No. Good. She stepped inside before I invited her. I closed the door. What happened? Susan walked directly into the living room and dropped the envelope onto the coffee table. Your husband happened. I almost corrected her. Our husband was not the phrase, obviously, but even your husband suddenly felt strange to me. What did he do? He called me last night. I remained standing. Susan sat down, crossed her arms, and let out a bitter laugh. Apparently, this entire disaster is my fault now. I said nothing. He told me I pressured him for years. He said I took advantage of him. He said if I had managed my life better, none of this would have happened. I thought about how quickly Michael had blamed Susan during our confrontation. I assume you disagree. Susan looked at me sharply. Of course I disagree. Did you take his money? He offered it. For 11 years, her eyes narrowed. You really enjoy saying that number. I lived through those 11 years without knowing what was happening. I think I've earned the right. Susan looked away. For several seconds, I could hear the old clock in the hallway ticking. Then she pushed the envelope toward me. If Michael wants to pretend this was all my idea, you should read those. I did not touch it immediately. What are they? Emails, messages, some printed conversations. Between you and Michael? Yes. Why do you have them? Because unlike Michael, I don't delete everything the second it becomes inconvenient. The bitterness in her voice was obvious. I sat across from her and opened the envelope. There were dozens of pages. Some were emails going back several years. Others were printed screenshots of text messages. I started near the oldest. At first, the messages were exactly what I expected. Loan payments, repairs, property taxes, discussions about contractors. Then I found my name. Michael had written, Lisa keeps a close eye on household spending, but she doesn't understand the bigger picture. Better not to overwhelm her with details. I read the sentence twice. Something tightened behind my ribs. Susan watched me. I told you he said you knew. This doesn't say I knew. No. I looked at her. So, at some point, you knew he was keeping details from me. Susan's face hardened. I knew he thought you wouldn't understand. That isn't the same thing. I know. I turned to another page. Michael had written that I was too emotionally attached to the Greenville house and that I mistook caution for wisdom. Another message said, once she sees the numbers clearly, she'll come around. I kept reading. My hands became colder with every page. Then I found an email from 3 years earlier. The subject line was simple. Long-term plan. Michael had written to Susan about retirement. He explained that once he stopped working, he wanted to simplify his life. Sell the Greenville house eventually. Move into something smaller. Use part of the proceeds to strengthen the Lake Keowee property. Spend more time there. I stared at the words. Sell the Greenville house. My house. The place I had assumed we would grow old in. Michael had discussed selling it with Susan before ever seriously discussing it with me. There had been occasional comments. Maybe this house will be too much for us someday. Downsizing isn't always bad. If we sold at the right time, we could free up money. I had thought those were ordinary retirement conversations. Apparently, Susan had heard the real version. I turned another page. Susan's reply had asked, Do you really think Lisa will agree to that? Michael answered, She will if the numbers make sense. She always worries at first, but eventually she adjusts. I stopped reading. For several seconds, I could not move. That was how my husband had described me. Not as his partner. Not as the woman with whom he would make decisions. As someone who would resist temporarily and then adjust. Susan leaned forward. Lisa, don't. She stopped. I looked down again. Another email discussed renovations to the lake house. Michael wrote, If we make the place comfortable enough, Lisa may actually like it once she spends time there. Susan responded, Assuming you ever tell her what you've put into it. Michael replied, One step at a time. One step at a time. My vision blurred. I put the pages on the table. I had spent 39 years thinking Michael and I were walking side by side. He had been walking several steps ahead, deciding where we would go, and assuming I would eventually follow. Susan spoke quietly. I didn't know everything. I looked at her. Do not ask me to feel sorry for you right now. I'm not. You accepted his money. Yes. You knew he was discussing our house. Yes. You knew I hadn't agreed. Susan hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Susan. Yes. The word was barely audible. Something inside me went still. There had been a part of me, even after everything, that wanted Susan to be innocent in one important way. Greedy, perhaps. Dependent. Careless. But deceived by Michael, just as I had been. These pages destroyed that possibility. When did you know? I don't know exactly. That's not true. She looked down. Maybe 5 or 6 years ago? 5 or 6 years? And you never said anything. What was I supposed to say? How about Lisa? Do you know your husband is spending your retirement money on a lake house? Susan flinched. You make it sound simple. It was simple. No, it wasn't. Michael kept saying everything would work out. For you, for everyone. I almost laughed. You really believed that Susan's eyes filled with anger. I believed what I needed to believe. That was the most truthful thing she had said since this began. I leaned back. At least now we're being honest. She stared at me. I know I should have asked questions. You did ask questions. She frowned. I tapped the email. You think Lisa will agree? You asked the person who benefited from keeping me uninformed. Susan said nothing. I continued reading. The worst message was not about money. It was about me. Michael had written Lisa likes feeling secure. She doesn't need to be involved in every decision that creates that security. I stared at those words for a long time. Security. I had used my desire for security as the excuse for taking my choices away. He seemed to believe that as long as the final result was comfortable, the deception required to create it did not matter. And maybe that was the heart of everything. Michael did not think of himself as a dishonest man. He thought of himself as the man entitled to decide what truth I could handle. Susan reached for her purse. There's more. I looked at her. What Michael wanted the lake place too. I already suspected that. No. I mean, he didn't keep pouring money into it just because of me. She glanced at the papers. He loved it there. He talked about retirement there constantly. Without me, he said you'd come around. I closed my eyes. For years, Michael had described the lake house as Susan's need. Now, the truth was clearer. Susan benefited from it. Michael wanted it, and I was supposed to finance part of that future before being informed it existed. Susan stood. I brought you those because I'm not letting him rewrite this like I forced him. I looked up at her. Don't confuse telling the truth now with doing the right thing then. Her face tightened. I know. I wasn't sure she did, but at least she had given me something Michael never intended me to see. Before she reached the door, I said, Susan? She turned. Did you ever feel guilty? She looked at me for a long moment. Yes. Then why didn't you stop? Her eyes dropped. Because the house was beautiful. Because I needed the money. Because Michael kept saying he had it handled. There was that phrase again. I have it handled. Susan left. I remained in the living room with the emails spread across the coffee table. The account had hurt. The money had hurt. The plan for our house had hurt. But those messages cut deeper. They showed me how Michael saw me when I was not in the room. Cautious. Emotional. Someone who would eventually adjust. I picked up one email again. Once she sees the numbers clearly, she'll come around. For 39 years, I had thought compromise meant two people meeting somewhere in the middle. Michael had apparently believed it meant waiting until I accepted the place he had already chosen. I gathered the pages and placed them back in the envelope. There would be no more private confrontations, no more conversations where Michael could blame Susan and Susan could blame Michael. It was time for all of us to sit at the same table. And this time, neither of them would control the story. I asked Emily to come over the next evening. I did not tell Michael exactly why. I only said, we need to talk as a family. He looked at me from across the kitchen. About what you already know. His eyes narrowed. Is Susan coming? Yes. That made him stand straighter. Why? Because I'm tired of hearing separate versions of the same lie. Michael opened his mouth to argue, but I walked away before he could. For years, he had controlled difficult conversations by deciding when they started what information mattered and when enough had been said. Not this time. Susan arrived first. She looked uncomfortable the moment she saw the dining table. I had placed a neat stack of documents at my seat. Nothing dramatic, no scattered papers, no shouting waiting to happen. Just evidence. Emily arrived 10 minutes later. She hugged me tightly before sitting down. Michael came in last. He looked around the table. What is this, an intervention? No, I said. It's the first honest family conversation we've had in years. Nobody smiled. Michael sat across from me. Susan took the chair beside him, though she left more space between them than usual. Emily sat beside me. For a few seconds, I looked at all three of them. My husband, his sister, our daughter. 4 people who had spent years living inside different versions of the same family. I placed the first statement on the table, the account. Michael looked away. I placed the next pages beside it, the transfers to Blake Ridge Holdings, then the property documents, the lake house, then the home equity application, our Greenville house. Finally, I placed Susan's printed emails on top. And these? Michael looked sharply at Susan. You gave her those? Susan crossed her arms. Yes. His face flushed. What the hell is wrong with you? Susan laughed bitterly. Interesting question coming from you. I raised my hand. No. Both of them looked at me. You will not turn this into a fight about who exposed whom. Michael leaned back. So, what do you want the truth? I've already explained. No. You've minimized. He looked irritated. I helped my sister. Susan immediately said, Don't start. Michael turned toward her. What? You are not making this all about helping me. I spent years cleaning up your financial disasters. You spent years because you wanted that house too. Emily looked from one to the other. Dad Michael ignored her. Susan continued. You picked the contractors. You chose half the renovations. You spent more weekends there than I did some years. That doesn't change the fact that you constantly needed money. You offered it because you couldn't manage anything. Susan's face turned red. At least I didn't lie to my wife for 11 years. The room went completely silent. Michael stared at her. I should have felt satisfaction. I didn't. Watching them turn on each other did not feel like victory. It felt ugly. All those years of secrecy had created something rotten between them two. I looked at Michael. Did you want the lake house for your retirement? He exhaled through his nose. I like the property. That isn't what I asked. Yes. Emily closed her eyes briefly. I continued. Did you discuss selling this house with Susan? And Michael glanced at the email. I discussed possibilities before discussing them with me. We had talked about downsizing. We talked generally. You discussed a plan with Susan. I was thinking ahead. For all of us. Yes. Susan laughed again. Michael snapped. Would you stop? No, she said. Tell Lisa what you told me. His expression changed. I looked at Susan. What did he tell you? Susan leaned forward. That once you saw the financial benefit, you'd adjust. I already knew that from the emails, but hearing her say it aloud in front of Michael was different. I looked at him. Is that how you saw me? Michael rubbed his temple. You're taking private conversations out of context. Then give me the context. I knew you would resist major changes, because I had the right to. You resist everything involving risk. I felt Emily shift beside me. Michael continued. You've always been like this, Lisa. Every dollar has to feel safe. Every decision has to be comfortable. I stared at him. You told me we needed to live that way. I told you we needed discipline. While you secretly spent hundreds of thousands, it wasn't spent on nothing. His voice rose. The lake house has value. I didn't throw money into a hole. You threw trust into one. He stared at me. I continued. You told me vacations were too expensive. Michael said nothing. You told me to wait on dental work. That is not fair. You told me our kitchen could wait. My car could wait. Everything could wait because retirement came first. It did come first. No, your plan came first. He pushed his chair back slightly. You benefited from everything I provided for this family. The sentence landed strangely. I looked at him. What did you say? Michael seemed to realize he had stepped somewhere dangerous, but pride would not let him stop. I worked for decades. I earned more than you did for most of our marriage. This house, the investments, the retirement accounts, Emily interrupted. Dad. No, Emily. Your mother is sitting here acting like every decision I made was theft. I felt something inside me become very calm. Were you about to say the money was more yours than mine? Michael looked directly at me. I'm saying I carried most of the financial weight. There it was. Not an apology, not partnership, a ledger. 39 years reduced to whose paycheck had been larger. I thought of raising Emily, managing our home, working at the library, supporting Michael when his father died, hosting his family on holidays, helping care for his mother during her final months. I thought of every compromise I had made because I believed we were one household, one team, one future, Michael continued. You lived a good life, Lisa. The words almost sounded generous, as if he had given me my life. Susan stared down at the table. Emily whispered, Dad, stop. But he didn't. You had security. You never had to worry whether the mortgage would be paid. I looked at him. I worried because you told me to worry. That is ridiculous. No. You created limits and asked me to live inside them while you secretly created exceptions for yourself and Susan. Susan said quietly. He did. Michael turned on her. Oh, now you're innocent. I never said I was. You took every check. Yes. You begged whenever something went wrong. Yes. You would have lost that house years ago without me. Yes. Susan's voice suddenly became harder. But you wanted it just as badly as I did. Stop pretending you were some saint saving your helpless little sister. Michael's face twisted with anger. You were helpless half the time, and you liked being needed. That stopped him. Susan leaned closer. You liked being the person who could fix everything. You liked making decisions no one questioned. I watched Michael. For the first time, he had no immediate answer. And suddenly, I understood something I had not fully seen before. Their arrangement had fed both of them. Susan got money. Michael got control. I looked at the papers spread across the table. All that secrecy, all those excuses, all those decisions made around me instead of with me. Something inside me finally released. I reached down and touched my wedding ring. I had worn it so long that the skin beneath it was slightly lighter. Emily noticed first. Mom! I slid the ring slowly from my finger. Michael's face changed. Lisa, don't do something dramatic. I almost smiled. Even now, he needed to define my reaction for me. I placed the ring on the table. The tiny sound it made against the wood seemed louder than the arguments. Nobody spoke. I looked at Michael. I spent 39 years believing we were building one life. My voice shook once, but I continued. You were building another one behind my back. Michael stared at the ring. Lisa, no. I shook my head. I am not screaming. I am not throwing you out into the street tonight. I am not trying to punish you. He looked at me, but I will no longer pretend this is a misunderstanding. Emily reached for my hand beneath the table. I let her hold it. Michael's voice softened. You're talking about 39 years. Yes. Doesn't any of that matter? It matters more than you understand. My eyes burned. That is why this hurts. Susan wiped at one eye. I looked at both of them. You two spent years deciding what I should know, what I would understand, what I would eventually accept. Neither answered.
That ends tonight.
Michael stared at me. What does that mean? I looked down at the wedding ring between us. It means I need to find out what my life looks like when I'm no longer living inside decisions someone else made for me. He seemed smaller somehow, not physically, just less powerful. The strange thing was, I did not feel powerful either. I felt devastated, relieved, terrified, free, all at once. That evening did not end with a dramatic slammed door. Susan left first. Emily stayed beside me. Michael went upstairs without speaking, and my wedding ring remained on the dining room table. For the first time in 39 years, I went to bed without it. I cried that night, not because I regretted taking it off, because I finally understood what it represented. I had believed it meant partnership. Michael had treated partnership as permission to decide for both of us. And now that illusion was gone. The next morning, I woke up knowing exactly what I had to do. Not destroy Michael, not destroy Susan. Protect myself, find the truth, and make sure the next decision about my future was finally mine. The morning after I took off my wedding ring, I woke before sunrise. For several seconds, I forgot what had happened. Then I looked at my left hand. The pale circle around my finger brought everything back. Michael, Susan, the account, the lake house, the papers, 39 years. I lay there, listening to the quiet house, and waited for panic to come. Instead, I felt strangely For weeks, I had been reacting to discoveries. Now I needed to make decisions, not angry decisions, not revenge, careful ones. That distinction mattered to me. I did not want Michael destroyed. I did not want Susan homeless. I did not want Emily forced to choose between her parents. What I wanted was much simpler. The truth, transparency, and whatever fair portion of the life I had spent, nearly 4 decades, helping build. Michael came downstairs around 7. He looked exhausted. For once, neither of us pretended everything was normal. He poured coffee and stood by the counter. "Are you really doing this?" I looked at him. "Doing what ending our marriage. I'm protecting myself. That isn't an answer. It is the only one I have today." Michael rubbed his face. "You're making permanent decisions while you're angry." I almost smiled. It was remarkable how often he described my feelings for me. "I'm not angry enough to be careless." He looked at my bare hand. "You took off your ring." "Yes." 39 years, Lisa. I know exactly how long. He sat across from me. I made mistakes. 11 years is not one mistake. He looked away. I continued. I'm going to speak with someone about the finances. His expression hardened. A lawyer, someone who can explain my options. Why? The question stunned me. Because I no longer trust the person who has been managing our money. His face tightened. You're treating me like a criminal. I'm treating you like a husband who hid hundreds of thousands of dollars from his wife. He stood. I'm not discussing this before coffee. Then he walked upstairs. That might have worked on me once. Not anymore. By the end of the week, I had begun the formal process of separating our finances and understanding what would happen if our marriage ended. I followed Carol's advice carefully. Keep copies. Document everything. Do not make large emotional transfers. Do not sign anything you do not understand. Ask questions until the answers make sense. For the first time in decades, I sat in professional offices and listened to people discuss our marriage as numbers. Income, assets, accounts, property, transfers, debt. It was strange hearing 39 years reduced to documents. But those documents also told a story Michael could not rewrite. The secret account existed. Money had moved through it for 11 years. Significant funds from our married life had been redirected. Blake Ridge Holdings, LLC had received enormous financial support. The Lake Keowee property carried substantial obligations, and the proposed use of equity from our Greenville home was real enough to have been planned on paper. Michael could call those things misunderstandings. The numbers did not care. Once serious review began, his attitude changed. At first, he had acted offended, then frustrated, then worried. Eventually, he became quiet. He moved into a furnished apartment about 20 minutes away while everything was being sorted out. The evening he packed, I stood in our bedroom doorway and watched him fold shirts into a suitcase. It was not dramatic. That almost made it worse. No shouting, no broken picture frames. Just two people who had shared a closet for decades, deciding which clothes belonged in which life. Michael held up an old gray sweater. "You bought this. Christmas. 2014, 2015. He nodded. Then he folded it. For 1 second, I wanted to tell him not to go. Not because I believed the marriage could return to what it had been. Because habit can feel like love when you are frightened. Michael zipped the suitcase. "I never thought we'd end up here." I looked at him. Neither did I. He carried the case downstairs. At the front door, he turned. "You know I loved you." My throat tightened. "I know you believed that." His face changed. Believed love without honesty becomes something else. He stood there for several seconds. Then he left. That night, the house felt enormous. I walked from room to room, turning off lights. When I reached the bedroom, I stared at his empty side of the bed. I cried harder than I had expected. Justice is not a celebration when the person who hurt you is also someone you once loved deeply. That was something I learned during those months. People imagine that once a betrayed woman stands up for herself every day, afterward feels empowering. It doesn't. Some days I felt strong. Other days I missed Michael's footsteps in the hallway. I missed hearing him complain about the thermostat. I missed seeing his reading glasses left beside the newspaper. Once I woke in the middle of the night and reached toward his side of the bed before remembering he no longer slept there. I cried into my pillow. The next morning, Emily came over. I told her what had happened. She held my hand. "Mom, missing him doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. I know. You can miss who you thought he was." That sentence stayed with me. Maybe that was exactly what grief was. Not longing for the deception. Mourning the version of my marriage I had believed in. Meanwhile, the financial reality around the lake house became more difficult. Michael no longer had the same income he once did. The secret account could not support everything indefinitely. Susan's business remained unstable. The property carried obligations that could no longer be ignored. Eventually, selling the lake house became the practical option. Susan called me once during that period. She sounded bitter. "You got what you wanted." I almost hung up. Instead, I said, "What exactly do you think I wanted? The house is going to be sold. I did not create its debt. You started all this. No, Susan. I discovered it." She went silent. There is a difference between causing consequences and refusing to prevent them. For years, Michael had protected Susan from consequences, and Susan had protected Michael from questions. Now, neither could do that. I later learned the lake property would be put on the market as part of untangling the financial mess surrounding it. Michael was furious. Susan was devastated. I felt neither joy nor guilt. The house had never been mine emotionally. It represented years of choices made without me. If it had to be sold to resolve those choices, that was not revenge. That was reality. The strangest part was what happened to Michael's secret account. The very thing he had hidden, because he believed secrecy gave him control, became one of the clearest records of what he had done. Transfers, dates, balances, payments. A map of 11 years. He had treated that account like a private room with a locked door. But once the door opened, everything inside became evidence of the choices he thought no one would question. One afternoon months into the process, I sat alone at my dining table, the same table where I had placed my wedding ring. The house was quiet. Sunlight fell across the wood. I thought about how badly I had wanted justice when this began. But justice had not arrived like thunder. It arrived as paperwork, boundaries, difficult conversations, sleepless nights, and the slow realization that Michael could no longer decide what I knew. He could no longer tell me what we could afford. He could no longer place papers in front of me and assume I would sign. That was the true change. Not that he had lost control of the lake house. Not that Susan had lost the lifestyle she expected him to finance. It was that I had stopped surrendering authority over my own life. For the first time in 39 years, I did not know exactly what my future would look like. But I knew something more important. Whatever happened next, I would understand the numbers. I would ask the questions, and I would make my own decisions. Michael's letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in early spring. By then, several months had passed since he moved out. The Lake Kiowa property was in the process of being sold. Financial documents had been reviewed, accounts separated, and the shape of our marriage had changed from something emotional into something painfully administrative. I was getting used to the quiet. Not completely, but enough. I had learned how loud a refrigerator could sound at night when no one else was in the house. I had learned that Sunday mornings felt longer without Michael turning pages of the newspaper at the kitchen table. And I had learned that peace and loneliness could exist in the same room. The envelope was waiting in the mailbox. My name was written across the front in Michael's handwriting. Lisa. No return label, no printed address sticker, just his handwriting. I stood at the end of the driveway holding it for nearly a minute. Part of me wanted to throw it away, unopened. Another part needed to know what he had finally decided to say, when there was no room left for interruption, excuses, or argument. I carried it inside, made coffee, sat at the dining table. Then I opened it. There were 6 handwritten pages. Michael had always had neat handwriting. Even when Emily was little, he was the one who labeled storage boxes because mine leaned sideways. Seeing those familiar letters hurt in a way I had not expected. The first line read, "Lisa, I have rewritten this letter 4 times because every version sounded like I was still trying to defend myself." I stopped reading. For several seconds, I stared at that sentence. Then I continued. He wrote that he knew saying he was sorry was not enough. He knew the secret account was not a misunderstanding. He knew I had asked him direct questions and he had lied. Then he wrote something I had waited months to hear. He told me how it started. The first transfer had been small. Susan was struggling after her divorce and needed help covering an expense connected to the property. Michael told himself it was temporary. He moved the money. I did not notice. Nothing happened. No argument. No consequence. So when Susan needed more, he did it again. Michael wrote, "The first time felt like crossing a line. The second time felt like managing a problem." That sentence stayed with me. He said each transfer made the next one easier. Soon he stopped thinking of the account as a secret he needed to confess, and started thinking of it as something separate from our marriage. His money, his decisions, his responsibility. I hated reading that, but for the first time, he was not blaming Susan. He wrote that Susan asked for help, yes, but he chose to give it. He chose to keep giving it, and he chose to lie to me. Then came the part that hurt most because it was so simple. Michael admitted that over time, he began believing that because he earned more money than I did, he deserved more authority over what happened to it. Not legally, not even consciously at first, but emotionally. He wrote, "I told myself I understood the numbers better than you. Then I turned that into believing I had the right to make decisions you would disagree with." I lowered the pages. That was it. The truth I had been circling for months. Not Susan, not the lake house, not his mother's dying request. Those things mattered, but they were not the center. Entitlement was. Michael had believed knowledge gave him authority. Authority became control, and control became secrecy. I kept reading. He admitted something else. He liked being needed. Susan needed him. Her financial problems gave him a role he understood. He could solve things, write checks, call lenders, negotiate with contractors, fix emergencies. He wrote that at work, people had respected him because he always had answers. After retirement approached, he feared losing that sense of importance. The lake property made him feel useful, powerful even. I remembered Susan saying almost exactly that at our family dinner. You liked being needed. At the time, Michael had gone silent. Now I understood why. She had been right. Michael wrote, "I kept telling myself I was protecting everyone. The truth is, I liked being the person who decided what everyone needed." I cried then, quietly. Not because the confession fixed anything, because I had spent so long wondering whether I was somehow too cautious, too suspicious, too unforgiving. And here finally was Michael naming what he had refused to name while we were still living together. He wrote about me next. He admitted that he had used my careful nature against me. He knew I trusted him. He knew I disliked financial conflict. He knew I would listen when he said something was too expensive because I believed he was looking at information I did not understand, and rather than respect that trust, he used it. He wrote, "You thought I was carrying responsibility for both of us." I turned that responsibility into permission. I covered my mouth with my hand. That sentence hurt more than any balance sheet because it was exactly right. Michael had not stolen only money from me. He had stolen informed choices. Then he addressed the word that had haunted my marriage. Later, he said he had always planned to tell me, after Susan stabilized, after the property increased in value, after retirement, after he could show me that everything had worked, after the home equity plan made sense, after. He wrote, "I kept waiting for a version of the truth that would not make me look guilty." That version never came because it did not exist. I sat very still. Outside, a lawnmower started somewhere down the street. Ordinary life continued. The letter went on. Michael said he did not expect forgiveness. Then almost at the end, he asked for something I had suspected might come. Another chance. Not immediately. Not as if nothing happened. But eventually. He wrote that maybe with counseling, complete financial transparency, and enough time, we could try to build something different. He said he still loved me. He missed our home. He missed our mornings. He missed me. I read that paragraph twice. Then I cried harder. Because I believed him. I believed he missed me. I even believed he loved me in whatever way he understood love. That was no longer enough. For years, I had believed forgiveness meant reopening the door. Now I understood forgiveness could also mean closing it without hatred. I finished the letter. Michael's final line read, "I finally understand that saying I was trying to protect you does not change the fact that I took away your right to choose." I folded the pages carefully. Then I sat at the table for a long time. The strange thing was, I felt lighter. Not because I wanted him back, because the truth had finally arrived without resistance. No Susan, no excuses, no bigger picture. Just responsibility. 2 days later, I wrote back. My letter was much shorter. Michael, thank you for finally telling me the truth without asking me to doubt what I lived through. I hope you mean what you wrote. I hope you become the man who understands that love does not mean deciding for someone else. I do forgive you, but forgiveness is not the same as returning. I spent too many years inside a marriage where important choices were made before I entered the room. I cannot build another marriage on top of that. I hope you find peace. I intend to find mine too. Lisa. I read it once. Then I put it in an envelope. For a moment, my hand rested over his name. There was no anger left in me that day, only sadness and certainty. I mailed the letter that afternoon. As I walked back to my car, I realized something I had not understood when all this began. Closure did not feel like winning. It felt like no longer needing the other person to become someone different before you could move forward. Michael had finally admitted the truth, and I was grateful for that. But the most important truth belonged to me. I could forgive him. I could remember the good years. I could mourn the marriage we had. And I could still choose not to go back. For the first time, those things no longer felt contradictory. They felt like freedom. Almost a year passed after the night Susan came to my door. Sometimes I still thought about how ordinary that evening had begun. I had been folding laundry. Michael was upstairs. Rain tapped against the windows. Then Susan stood on my porch and accidentally opened a door that had been locked for 11 years. Everything after that changed my life. The Lake Keowee property was eventually sold. I did not attend the closing. I did not ask to see photographs of the empty rooms or the dock Michael had once imagined as part of his retirement. By then, I no longer needed to watch something disappear in order to believe it was over. The sale helped resolve the financial obligations surrounding the property, and the larger process of separating our finances finally reached its conclusion. It was not simple. Nothing involving 39 years of marriage is simple. There were documents, meetings, numbers I had to learn, questions I had once trusted Michael to answer for both of us. But this time, I asked them myself. I received the portion of our marital assets that was determined to be mine, and through the final arrangement, I was able to keep the Greenville house. The first night after everything became official, I walked through each room alone. I touched the kitchen counter, the hallway wall, the doorframe where we had once measured Emily's height. For months, I had wondered whether the house would always feel like a monument to betrayal. It didn't.
It felt like mine, not because Michael had disappeared from its history. He hadn't. There were good memories there, and I no longer needed to pretend otherwise. But the house was also where I had raised my daughter, where I had cared for my mother, where I had laughed with friends, where I had become a woman capable of surviving something I once thought would destroy me.
Michael's choices were part of that house. They were not the whole story. A week later, I did something that might sound small. I opened a bank account. Only my name was on it. I sat across from a young woman at the bank who explained every option. Interest, access, beneficiaries, fees, online security. For most people, it would have been an ordinary appointment. For me, it felt almost ceremonial. Whenever I did not understand something, I asked her to explain it again. I did not apologize. I did not say my husband usually handles this. There was no husband handling it anymore. There was Lisa Martin, learning, choosing, signing her own name. When the banker slid the final paperwork toward me, I stared at the line where my signature belonged. For one brief second, I thought about Michael's handwritten note. Lisa may agree if presented as consolidation plus its improvements. He had once expected to guide my hand toward a decision without telling me what it truly meant. Now my hand belonged entirely to me. I signed. I walked out of the bank smiling. Not because of the money, because I understood it. That summer, I finally took the trip I had postponed for years. Alaska. Carol laughed when I told her. About time. Emily was even more excited than I was. She helped me choose a cruise, then insisted I buy a proper waterproof jacket instead of the cheapest one I could find. I laughed. I'm still allowed to be careful. Careful, she said, not deprived. I carried those words with me. The first morning, I saw glaciers from the ship. I stood at the railing with a cup of coffee and cried. The mountains rose above the water in shades of white and blue that photographs had never captured properly. For years, I had pictured seeing them with Michael. That realization hurt, but it did not ruin the moment. I had spent too much of my life believing something was valuable only if it happened according to the original plan. Life had taught me otherwise. Sometimes the plan breaks. The dream does not have to. I took a photograph and sent it to Emily. She replied almost immediately. You finally made it, Mom. I looked out at the ice and whispered, yes, I did. When I returned home, I began volunteering twice a week at the community library. I had missed being surrounded by books. I had missed helping people find what they were looking for. There was something comforting about shelves. They had names, places, categories. If something was missing, you could admit it was missing, instead of pretending it had never existed. I met many women around my age there, some widowed, some divorced, some still married after 50 years. We talked about grandchildren, arthritis recipes, travel television shows, and sometimes money. One afternoon, a woman named Margaret mentioned that her husband handled all their finances. I wouldn't even know what bank half-hour retirement is in, she said with a laugh. Everyone laughed politely. I didn't, not because I thought her husband was dishonest. I had learned something important from my own experience. Knowledge was not accusation. Understanding your financial life did not mean distrusting your spouse. I said gently, maybe ask him to show you sometime. Margaret shrugged. I'd feel silly. You shouldn't. She looked at me. I smiled. You deserve to understand the you helped build. The words came naturally. Later, I realized they were words I wished someone had told me 20 years earlier. I never became suspicious of every marriage. That would have meant Michael's betrayal still controlled me.
I did not tell women to search their husbands' phones or expect hidden accounts. I simply encouraged them to know where important documents were, understand what they signed, know what they owned, ask questions. Partnership should survive questions. If it cannot, the questions are not the problem. Emily and I also became closer. There had always been love between us, but now there was more honesty. She stopped filtering things because she thought she was protecting me. I stopped pretending I had everything under control simply because I was her mother. Sometimes she asked if I was lonely. I told her the truth. Sometimes I missed Michael. That surprised people when I admitted it, but 39 years does not vanish because the ending was painful. I missed his laugh. I missed the younger man who built me a bookshelf. I missed the father who carried sleeping Emily from the car. What I did not miss was wondering whether the person beside me had already made decisions about my future without me. That distinction became easier with time. Susan and I rarely spoke. The bitterness surrounding the sale of the lake property took time to settle. Eventually, she sent me a short message. No excuses, no requests. Just, I'm sorry for the part I played. I stared at it for a while before replying. Thank you for saying that. Nothing more. Not every relationship needs to be restored to be released. Michael and I remained separated in every meaningful sense, and I continued moving forward with my own life. His letter had given me closure, but my healing did not depend on what he did afterward. That was another lesson I had earned the hard way. On the anniversary of Susan's visit, I woke early. The morning was cool. I made coffee and carried it onto the front porch. There was no rain, just soft sunlight through the trees. I sat in the same house where 1 year earlier I had heard Susan say there was more than $300,000 in an account I did not know existed. I could still picture myself standing in the doorway, confused, frightened, trying desperately to find an innocent explanation. I thought about the woman I had been that night. I did not judge her for trusting Michael. I felt tenderness toward her. She had believed in her marriage because she had spent decades helping build it. There was nothing shameful about that. But she had also believed that keeping peace sometimes meant swallowing questions. That was the part I would never return to. I took a sip of coffee and looked at the empty chair beside me. For once, it did not look empty. It simply looked available. For a friend. For Emily. For whoever might visit. Or for no one at all. And that was fine, too. I once believed the greatest thing Michael stole from me was money. I was wrong. Money could be divided. Property could be sold. Accounts could be corrected. What hurt most was realizing that for years, someone else had been deciding how much truth I was allowed to have. So the greatest thing I recovered was not 346.92. It was my voice, my right to ask, my right to understand, my right to say no. My right to choose what happened next. At 64, I had once feared that starting over meant admitting my life had failed. Now I understood something completely different. Starting over did not erase the life behind me. It simply meant the life ahead of me finally belonged to me. Life has a way of teaching us that trust and blindness are not the same thing. For many years, I believed that loving someone meant giving them the benefit of the doubt. I still believe that, but love should never require surrendering your right to understand the decisions shaping your own life. Financial betrayal is not only about dollars hidden in an account. It is about choices taken away. It is about vacations never taken, needs, postponed signatures requested, without full truth, and one person deciding that the other does not need to know. And if you are a woman in your 60s, 70s, or beyond, please remember this: your age does not make your voice smaller. Maybe you spent decades raising children. Maybe you supported a spouse. Maybe you managed a household while someone else managed the investments. That does not mean you have lost the right to ask questions now. You deserve to know what you own. You deserve to understand what you sign. You deserve a future in which your choices matter. I also learned that forgiveness does not always mean reconciliation. I could forgive Michael without rebuilding the marriage. I could remember the good years without pretending the bad choices did not happen. And I could let him face the consequences of his decisions without spending the rest of my life angry. Sometimes healing is not getting your old life back. Sometimes healing is realizing you are allowed to build a new one. If you had been in my place, what would you have done? Would you have confronted Michael the first night? Or would you have stayed quiet and gathered the truth? And who betrayed Lisa more deeply in your opinion? Michael or Susan? Tell me in the comments. I would especially love to hear from anyone who has ever had to start over later in life. And if this